Okay, well, thank you everyone who's in attendance. This is Joel Smith with the ASQ Stat Division. I'm pleased to have here today Steve Prevett with the Fluor Corporation, who will be presenting on control chart dashboards, or SPC-based dashboards. Steve's got about 18 years of experience in this field with Department of Energy environmental cleanup sites, and he's worked with maintenance, conduct of operations, occupational safety, quality and radiological controls. He's currently at the Savannah River site, which is in Aiken, South Carolina, and there he's actually worked on a project to drive injury rates lower, and through that project was able to actually get them below a baseline level before. Steve's has his BS degree in civil engineering from Virginia Tech. He is proudly a Heidi-Tighty from Virginia Tech, which if you're not familiar, you should certainly research afterwards, and also has his MS degree in operations research from the Naval Postgraduate School. Steve's also been a U.S. Navy nuclear submarine officer for 12 years, so we're really happy to have Steve here. He comes highly recommended, and we look forward to his presentation today. As he presents, if anyone has any questions, there's a questions portion of the GoToWebinar interface where you can type in questions, and the majority of those will be answered at the end. We'll kind of pick and choose what we can answer. If anything seems urgent or especially relevant during one part of the presentation, we may interrupt and ask those questions as well. Also, we are recording this webinar, and we'll have this posted at a later date for future viewing. So I'll go ahead and turn things over now. Steve, thanks again, and we look forward to your talk.
Well, thanks for the fine introduction, Joel. You are hearing me, correct?
Yes.
Yes, good. Okay, with that test over, I am Steve Prevett. I'm in a government site, so I'm behind a bit of a firewall here. So Joel will do the operation of the software, but I've got the phone line and my copy of the slides, so we'll move forward with this. I should tell you, as a government project, all these materials are actually in the open domain. They are not copyrighted. You will see on the cover slide an EFCOG.org website that has this presentation and many others I've developed over the years. I just do professionally ask, if you make use of these materials, please do provide attribution to where they came from, and drop me a note. Let me know how you found them to be. With that, this presentation is a marriage of a very old concept and a relatively new concept. We'll move on to slide number 2. We'll talk a little bit about the dashboard. I mean, that even came up with the CEO of Ford talking about his red, yellow, green dashboard at the last WCQI. Color coding and trending has always been very popular. Tell me what it is in terms of red, yellow, green. However, some of our traditional methods of doing that in business haven't helped much as far as understanding the data. Understanding, and I'm a Dr. Deming fan or disciple, and understanding that theory of variation. What's the data really trying to tell us that we're trying to simplify down to red, yellow, and green? I'll give you a little bit of information on that. You can use Excel spreadsheet to create these dashboards. You do not need extremely fancy software. It can be done. The instructions in this file are from 2003 Office, but Office 2007 and 2010 can handle it. And just to let you know some of the credibility behind this, I'll point out a few places where this has been published by both American Society for Quality and the American Society of Safety Engineers. Slide 3. Well, let's get into a little background here. What's a dashboard? Well, I have several of these introductory slides, and I've put the website from which I've received that information, give the attribution, but I like this quote on this page of analog aesthetics meets digital information. A lot of this is trying to make a friendly presentation, especially to non-statisticians, to our managers who are making decisions from the data and trying to give a really hard-hitting executive summary of what's that data trying to tell us. Where's my success areas and where's my problem areas? Next slide. Here's a little quote talking about giving attribution to Robert Kaplan and David Norton. Hopefully folks out there have heard of the balanced scorecard. It actually goes back about almost 20 years now. We're just about that 20-year anniversary of the Harvard Business Review article called The Balanced Scorecard, Measures That Drive Performance. And there is a book out there, The Balanced Scorecard, Translating Strategy into Action in '96, and I'm sure with the ASQ website you can find lots of information out about scorecards and dashboards. Next slide. We're on slide number 5. Dashboard concept. Here's another good quote I found, and this explains why they call it a dashboard, especially talking about a commercial airline cockpit. I mean, when you go on a flight, you walk in the door of the plane, and when that secure door is open while they're on the ground, you can look in and just marvel at the displays the pilots have to work with. And there's actually a lot of design goes into a cockpit of an aircraft, and they have certain gauges grouped together for the engines or the landing gear, or navigation is together in one area. Of course, most of the common used tools are in the center of the dashboard. And then there are certain alarm features so that if something's going wrong, it grabs the attention of the airline pilot. Of course, on the other extreme, I have a friend of mine, Phil Monroe, who talks about, well, you wouldn't want to walk in, look in the cockpit, and only see 3 lights. Okay, not okay, and sort of okay. So we have to have a little more information than just simply what is the state of this aircraft? Is it okay, sort of okay, or not okay? So we have to have a little more detail than that. Within the Department of Energy, a group, and this is where that website has some information, is called the Energy Facility Contractors Group, the EFCOG. Of course, government has to have acronyms, so this slide is full of acronyms. But actually the place I'm at now, which I've only been for 2 years, my predecessors here came up with key performance indicators. And I know KPIs is a term that's out there. I'm sure they did not invent it. But it basically got accepted by the U.S. government to be used as a system within the U.S. Department of Energy. And they actually published a performance metrics manual. At that time, I was working in Hanford and was doing some of the preliminary work on these control chart dashboards, and basically, interestingly enough, that publication shut my work down because, oh, well, they said, oh, the Department of Energy says we have to make charts that look like this using moving averages and all sorts of stuff you'll see in the next couple slides. So I'm kind of wary of, there's a balance between standardization and innovation. Of course, I don't want to be in the position now of preventing other people from innovating further. But I will definitely say some of this squelched some of the work I was doing. Interestingly enough, as you'll see, I basically survived that, and the SPC dashboards came back to life at Hanford, and now have actually gone to Savannah River. If we look at slide 7, this is the format, and I know many of the tools out there are like this, where you have a set of panes, and you'll have a subject. I see the first line is management systems. So then they'll talk about regulatory performance and quality assurance. Oh my word, something must be wrong with safety culture. It's red. And something called authorization basis, which is a nuclear issue. And stakeholder relations, otherwise known as what's our customer think of us. And so we see those are green, red, or yellow. And there's 4 little tiny squares, which are also supposed to give you an idea of what's the past history, the last 4 quarters. And I give you a link. I believe that link is still active if you want to read that information. Slide number 8 is where we get into the meat of the information. We take a look at this chart, and what they are doing is taking something from the safety arena called total recordable case rate, but they also did this in quality in terms of corrective action managements completed on time, number of corrective actions, things like that, expressed it in terms of the past 12 months, did a 12-month rolling average, and color-coded according to where they fell against an arbitrary goal. Now, for those who are familiar with Dr. Deming's 14 points, most people who follow Dr. Deming's techniques, including myself, are pretty much aghast at this point. Arbitrary targets, that's point number 11, to try to eliminate arbitrary targets. And there were a lot of problems, as we'll see in the next slide. Slide number 9, EFCOG format shortcomings. The charts basically only showed 12 months worth of data. If I go back to Dr. Schuhart's work, he talked about having 25 data points of subsets of 4 before you declared a process stable. So I've always tried to use Dr. Schuhart's 25 rule. I've heard some people say 36, but very few authors of any repute will say only analyze 12 data points to tell you what your system is doing. And it's evaluated against numerical targets, no use of statistical trending. One thing about moving averages, and I suspect maybe I should ask for a poll of how many people use moving averages. I've taught business courses, and I see a lot of people use moving averages because MBAs use moving averages. And the difficulty is the moving average does exactly what it's advertised to do. It smooths out the data so you don't see all the little bumps and nooks and crannies, and hopefully gives you some idea of where the data is going. Well, the thing is, I can take a shotgun and blast it against the wall and put a moving average through the height of the pellets from the floor. And it'll move up and down, and it will mean absolutely nothing because it's random noise. Most of the management, when they shifted to moving averages at Hanford, couldn't explain how is it that this month's value is higher than last month, but moving average moved down. I'll let you cogitate that a moment before I give the answer. What happens in a moving average, especially a 12-month without any of that exponential weighted moving average stuff, is if it's 12-month moving average, the current data value is compared to the data value 13 months ago that fell off. Now, if the data value that fell off was lower than the current month's value, the moving average moves up. If it's higher, moving average moves down. You might as well manage by flipping a coin. Now, the little extra 4 squares, which was an EFCOG DOE thing, definitely confused people. Reaction to random noise, and I did see a lot of this manipulation of criteria occurs to make everything green. See, if everything's based on arbitrary targets, I can make myself looking very good by choosing targets that are, well, that I'm already meeting. In fact, the CEO of Ford, I remember in the video from the WCQI, was talking about, well, the first time they tried to do this, they had hundreds of colors, hundreds of things measured, and every single one was green. So he tried to encourage people to declare when were they yellow or red. But the natural tendency of many managers is to manipulate and or destroy the system in order to make everything green. Slide number 10, this is my favorite. Now, this was, I got to admit, there's a more modern thing about the Vinfen Corporation, but if you go to the Balanced Scorecard Institute, and if anybody's with the Balanced Scorecard Institute, I swear to you, this is what was on your website. We have this rather interesting chart. We have 2 bars. One bar is labeled 22% FY03, and one bar is labeled 23% fiscal year 04. So I have 2 data points. Apparently both the first quarter of those years, and anybody that reads any of Davis, Balistracci, and Dr. Wheeler can also already say, well, why am I comparing 2 points? But it gets even crazier, and I'm going to take the time to read this just so you have the full impact of it. We have a color light that is yellow. Turnover rate has increased slightly since the same time period last year, but remains below industry norms. The turnover rate for the first quarter, Q1, in FY04 was 1% more than the first quarter of last fiscal year, but the total number of employees increased by 4%, parenthesis, 1,289 employees on July 1st, 2002, 1,340 employees on July 1, 2003, close parenthesis. 78 employees were terminated between July 1 and September 30, 2003, compared with 70 employees during Q1 of FY03. My, how fascinating. So I have to ask the question, what in the world does this mean, and why is it yellow? Yet this is out there as a prime example of how to use the balanced scorecard. I think there's a better answer. So as we move down to slide 11, I'm also a fan of Dr. Russ Ackoff. And within his book, Ackoff's Best, or the actual book, Creating the Corporate Future, he does have a considerable write-up about metrics. And he says there's 3 management functions to metrics, is to identify actual and potential problems, threats and opportunities. Now, he doesn't talk about it, but remember, anybody familiar with SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? A very good idea to know what those 4 things are. Make a decision, an amazing concept. Now, of course, if you're a manager, you have to decide what to do and do it, or get it done by somebody else. And the last one, the third one, I'm sorry, is always interesting. Maintain and improve performance under changing and unchanging condition. Another good poll to take is, well, who thinks they are living under unchanging conditions? So we have a challenge. Most of us, I believe, would answer that we are living under changing conditions. And how do we maintain or improve performance? Slide 12, please. However, as I alluded to, the dashboard's got a lot of interesting features to it versus a 100-page statistical trending report. We can overview many facets of performance simultaneously. Now, I know there's been folks out there that have proposed indexes. Well, if I multiply the injury rate by 10% and divide by the number of people and add to it the overdue corrective maintenance and subtract from it the money I make and add this and add that, I get this one number that's supposed to represent the health of the company. Of course, for those who propose it, I say, okay, you're arriving at work and there's a big billboard right in front of your facility that says, today's number is 8.3. What do? Turn around, go home? Don't know. What's that number mean? But I find a lot of people want to tell me the health of the company in one number. So at least a good thing about the dashboard is that it allows me to keep those data streams separated so I can see what each data stream is trying to tell me. And it allows me to drill down to lower organization levels, and I get a quick read. You know, when you got the 30-second elevator speech and the boss or the CEO says, what's my number one problem? At least I can say, okay, these are reds, these are yellows, these are greens. So I like the Tom Peters bias for action. That's where I stole that phrase from. Next slide, 13. What could we bring into this game that already exists? Well, we want to predict and be proactive. Now, Dr. Deming said the job of management is prediction. So if we are going to manage a process, I got to be able to predict it. I can't just be following some random indicator and false alarms. I need to recognize when the stable system is stable and not performing well. Now, a stable system does not imply goodness. It may be stable, and I could be killing 10 people a year. That would be stable and predictable, but certainly less than optimal. I do want to incorporate risk models in a graded approach. I know Department of Energy talks about graded approach. Lots of companies out there want to manage risk. Rather difficult thing to do. You've got to be able to measure it. And determine the effects of previous decisions, and in terms of using some Department of Energy parlance, is something called Integrated Safety Management System. A lot like the ISO 9000 series standards about management systems we have in the Department of Energy. And it's well worth reading. It's, again, public information about Integrated Safety Management System. I think it is a good model for many corporations. Slide 14. I know there's been classes given on these webinars about statistical process control, and perhaps, Joel, if depending on interest, we could do some more how to make a control chart. I got to admit, I'm somewhat, at this point, assuming you know what a control chart is. I will show you some examples later on, but recognize there's something I'm trying to do, which is saying, is the process that I'm measuring stable and predictable? Which is another phrase for common cause variation that Dr. Deming used. I am just bouncing around an average between two control limits, which are based on 3 standard deviations from the average. But my prediction and my past performance shows me I'm staying between the control limits. I don't have a trend. And type 1 and type 2 errors are just like a fire alarm. I always use this as an explanation. Whatever building you're sitting in, I would ask you, is it on fire? And you would tell me, well, no, it's not. And I'd say, how do you know? Now, hopefully you would say, well, the smoke alarm's not going off, the fire alarm's not going off, there's no fire. Of course, there could be. That would be a type 2 error, that there's a fire in your building, but you don't know it, and the alarm's not going off. Now, of course, that's hazardous to your health. Now, of course, there's always probably more common the false alarm, the type 1 error. The alarm goes off, everybody duly evacuates the building because you believe the alarm function, and you're standing around outside, and the fire department shows up, or the drill monitors are out there going, well, that was a drill, just to see you knew what you're doing. We're practicing. Now, of course, one thing to watch out for, if you have too many false alarms, you end up disengaging the alarm values. That's why 3 standard deviations was chosen to minimize the combination of false alarms and failure to detect. And actually, many people have asked me how expensive is it to do control charting. We actually found it saved money at the Hanford, Washington site. Saved a lot of money in terms of even the direct expenses of gathering data and making a chart and not having to respin the chart to everybody's whim. Slide 15. Just to show you a little bit of history, you can go back to Quality Progress in 2004. You'll find an article by me called Stoplight Charts with SPC Inside. And that was where I originally proposed this idea. I'd been working on it since '97 and actually got in the first attempts to use it at Hanford. We've been using it for about a year. In 2003, I wrote the article. And no sooner had I submitted the article, but the document came out from Savannah River that said, thou shalt do moving averages. So we shut it down. I'm like, great, I just turned in an article about something we're no longer doing. Well, oddly enough, the moving averages failed miserably. Management could not determine what was going on. They were chasing their tail with random noise. And about a year later, I was given the opportunity to bring control charts back. A new vice president came in, and he looked at my work, and he said, you know, Steve, we're not getting anything out of these charts. What would you recommend? And I kind of was like, well, funny you should ask, sir. Let me show you something. And the very next day, I had updated all the old dashboards to the control charts and showed it to him. He said, this is great. Let's do it. And about literally the next day, ASQ published the article. So I was very happy that ASQ actually published when I was actually doing it. We did later on publish with the American Society of Safety Engineers the actual examples of what we're doing. And if you do go to the May 2010 Quality Progress, you'll find an article by me about some of the Hanford history. On the next page, slide 16, and we're about halfway through the presentation, and this is probably the peak, the critical slide. This is the basic concept. Rather than setting a bunch of limits and say, well, if this month's value is less than this, you're green. If it's between this and this, you're yellow. And if you're greater than that, you're red. And if you're familiar with the red bead experiment, I always, when I finish a red bead experiment, make such a chart and show how random noise just drives it crazy. That's a whole nother topic. There's a YouTube video out there of me. If you ever Google red beads on YouTube, you'll find a series of 6 YouTube videos of a red bead experiment I did many years ago at Hanford. So we're going to redefine the colors. We're going to make the control chart decision of, am I stable and predictable? Am I just looking at common cause variation? Well, if I am, I basically ask the question, am I stable and predictable where I want to be? Now, using the example of 10 injuries of some sort a year to a facility, if I have 10 deaths a year, that level's probably not acceptable, and I should at least color it yellow and do something to change the system. I certainly don't want to be the next person killed. Now, if it was 10 mosquito bites a year, assuming we don't get malaria, and we've had all those sprayings, and that's generally true, our insect bites don't tend to be very serious. 10 insect bites a year, I may say, well, that level's acceptable. If the worst thing that's happening is some insect bites, we're green, stay the course. Now, that's based upon looking at the baseline average and the control limits, not the most recent results. So once you decide your current baseline that you've said is my prediction of future performance is acceptable, it stays acceptable no matter what the current month's result is, unless I have a trend. Now, if I have a trend and I've declared like I've gone outside the 3 standard deviation control limits, that's a special cause variation. Dr. Deming used that term. I think Dr. Schuhart said assignable variation. But if I have a trend, the infamous, I have a trend, something's changed, I will set it to red, being an adverse trend if it's going the wrong direction. More injuries, red. I'm going to assume more injuries is bad. Sometimes I encourage people to report something, and going up may not be bad, but we'll make the assumption more is bad of things that quality and safety tends to count. We all tend to live to counting bad things, unfortunately. So I'll say, hey, no matter how good you are, if I've tripped the trend on the control chart, you're red. And I'll admit, when this first came out at Hanford, there was many managers that said, this isn't fair, I'm red, but my year-to-date injury rate is lower than that guy who's yellow. Well, the point being, we want you to act now so you don't become yellow like the other guy. So it is a very proactive thing where the trend outweighs the level. So if I have a trend, I immediately jump to, is it red or green? Of course, an improving trend, improvement no matter how slight, will be green. We reinforce and stay the course. So this is the meat of the ideas is slide 16. If nothing else, please keep this slide in mind. There will be a test. No. Okay, slide 17. Did learn a few things, especially with the one-year pause. I was challenged by management of how could it be that we would be green stable and suddenly we hit, I use 7 points in a row, the same side of the average. If you use 8 or 9, well, it's the same discussion, just different numbers. But let's say I was stable green at a good level, and suddenly I'm 7 points in a row above average, and Steve, you just made me red. I went from green to red. Where's my yellow? Now, of course, that also tells you who owns the chart. It's supposed to be the manager, not the statistician. But pardon. So anyway, what we did was on those rules, like 7 points in a row above average as a trend, if I got to 6 above average where going up is bad, I'd make it yellow if I was green. So at least I say, hey, I'm 1 month away from an adverse trend or a non-improving trend. Conversely, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. If I'm 1 month away from an improving trend and I would otherwise have been yellow or red, I'm white. And we did add in, because we found out this am I okay or not okay was not fine enough of a question. We added in a white for stable at okay. I kind of liken it to free parking in Monopoly. It's neither really phenomenal, but it's neither really bad. We can live with it if you're stable in this range, but we could improve if you wanted to. And we did throw in red. This is very rare, but because a lot of people were saying, well, I want to go red if I exceed a customer specification or a regulatory threshold. That's basically a baseline going out of those specifications. Then I would make you red. We really didn't invoke that much, but it kept management happy if I said you could invoke it. Always interesting. Okay, next slide is selection of measures, slide 18. Well, as I take a sip of water, interestingly enough, we're drowning in data. I suspect most of the people who've signed into this would say, yeah, we got databases all over the place. We're measuring NG rates. We're measuring corrective actions. We're measuring profit. We're measuring output. We got computers that tell us where any part is within the process in many cases. Yet, what does it mean? What's the important metrics? What's my business objectives? Now, I do have another topic on how to choose measures. I will say a lot of times I try to go into a group playing dumb and say, well, what are you in the business of doing? And they'll tell me, I say, well, what databases do you have? And they'll tell me their databases. And I'll say, well, how do we connect from the top to the bottom? I like Dr. Akoff talks about many times, yes, he has a quote in one of his books that says, managers who don't know what to measure, managers who don't know what to measure often end up wanting what they can measure. He puts it better than that. But many times we have the measure and then we chase for a reason to why we're measuring it. So watch out for that. And of course, there's the infamous leading indicators. Next slide. This looks very busy. It's in fine print, but just as an example, how did we define one of our charts? What was red, yellow, white, and green? You'll see some numerical targets in there, but at least they were based on external requirements to us. They were not internally driven, and we did them as a comparison to the baseline average, not to the monthly results. That avoided a lot of the reaction to random noise, so that we're able to say what is really a trend and what is not. Slide 20. Now, oh yes, I've been talking all about trends. Now this is, actually the top half of the slide is the list I happen to use. Now, if you go to different authors, you'll find different lists of trends. For example, or even softwares. I know Minitab tends to use the Western Electric rules, which are 9 points the same side of the average. Dr. Wheeler uses 8 points, and Dr. Atchison Duncan, and also an early attempt by the Department of Energy before I joined it to do control charts, used 7. Not wanting to get into a lot of control chart things, but I will say those people who use 9 tend to think control charting is based on the normal distribution, and those who use 7 believe it's based on the Chebyshev inequality. And if anybody is following Quality Digest, there's the people who think you've got to fit distributions to do control charts, and then there's the Chebyshev people. I'm one of the Chebyshev people. So yes, even after 100 years of doing this, you can't get the economists to agree. So that's my list of rules. I suggest, there's variations on the list, but choose a list and stick to it. You don't want to be messing with a list every day, or you won't have consistency. Now, I also have looked a little bit at low rate trending and how to keep a simple rule. We just based upon if you went more than 7 points in a row at 0, then we assumed you were 0. And if you got a non-zero result, we generally said, okay, we'll let one go by, but if another one comes in within 7 data points, we'll start looking. Of course, it depends on the severity of that one thing. They often tell about the Electra aircraft that it had a tendency for its wings to fall off. The first one crashed, and they said that's an anomaly. The second one crashed, and they started getting worried. The third one, they grounded the fleet. Okay, 21s, how to make a dashboard presentation. I just have these slides in. I'm going to skip over a lot of this detail, but it's here. And again, you'll have the slides from Joel, or you can go to the website and pull up this presentation. And right now, these are geared to Office 2003. I just make the point you don't have to have a set of expensive software to do this. Now, where I'm at Savannah River, they have some homebrew software for doing dashboards, and they were not designed for control charts, and we are kind of pushing the envelope with that software, and we're actually using the existing software to put in control chart-based dashboards. So again, I do not want anybody to have the excuse of this is too expensive. It is actually very cheap, and will give you results very quickly, and you won't have to spend a lot of time saying, well, what's my target, or how do I weight these different things in these indexes. I'm working with a group that's trying to assess the health of a facility with about 20 different metrics, and they're trying to determine the weighting factors for each of the 20 metrics to go into an index. And unfortunately, as I predicted, it's not working very well, so they've come to me after 3 months of time for me to try to straighten it out, and it's due in 3 days. Well, not quite, but that's about the situation. But this can turn around very quickly, very inexpensive. Slide 22, just saying setting up your panes. You can use conditional formatting. There's even better conditional formatting available in 2010, I believe. I'm just switching to it. With 2003, you could only have 3 conditional formats. So you would have whatever the underlying, so you could have 4 colors. With 2010, I believe you can have more conditional formatting. 23, well, that actually shows you what some control charts are like, so I'll just at least stick to this page. I did do a 4 chart per page layout just to keep you from having to flip through a lot of pages. You'll notice I've got a heavy black line at the average. I've got a squiggly red line on the control limit in the bad direction, and I'd have a blue line on the control limit in the right direction. There is a reason the first A case rate control limit squiggles. That's because that's called a U chart. And the occurrence report 1 is steady, and so is near misses, because those are both C charts. The near misses chart shows, you can see under there a green circle talking about 7 months in a row below average. So that would at least say, hey, after having 3 near misses, and these are fairly high level near misses, in less than a year, we've at least gone 7 months without one at this facility. Slide 24 also talks about linking these between pages. And as I say, it's not that hard to set up. Let's go to slide 25. You can use hyperlinks within the primary window, so you can have it pull up a file that would have those charts in it. If you're really good at macros and VBA, you can have multiple sheets within the same file and move around using macros. But for the non-macro people, if you just put 1 page per file, you can use the hyperlink to open the file and then close the file, and you're back to the panes. So as this, again, I leave these slides to the user if you'd like to make these charts. Slide 26 talks about how to link the colors together. So at least when I put a color on the chart, then that color automatically transfers to the dashboard page. So I leave that with you for ideas if you'd like to set something like this up yourself. Certainly there are commercial scorecard softwares out there. And at Hanford, slide 27, I actually just put the Excel files out on a file server. I got called in personally to the CEO's office, not when he was present, but into the CEO's grand office in order to install the links on his machine. So I know at least the CEO looked at this. And, of course, once the CEO is looking, the vice presidents are looking. And several of the vice presidents finally did realize the reds were just warning signs. They were trends, and if they could say, this is what happened, this is what I'm doing about it, they were very successful. The ones that went, well, what the heck has Steve done to me today, they didn't succeed very well. I literally had a manager who said he got at least 2 phone calls a day, and what the heck is Pravat doing to me today? So it's life as a statistician can be interesting. Okay, slide 28 gives you an idea of what our grid looked like. Now, this is primarily our safety and health page, and we talked about our leading indicators and our lagging indicators. Mostly, I don't view leading indicators like the economic leading indicators of trying to predict for performance. I view, when I take this idea from Dr. Russ Akoff, I view leading indicators as means to build a better future. I don't want to predict the future and try to live within it. I want to build the better future than what my prediction is. But I can use my leading indicators to help me, my cultural indicators. Certainly, if you read and watch the videos of the investigation of the Gulf oil spill of a year ago, there were many, many safety and quality culture issues on that platform. If you're ever looking for good convincer type of case studies for why should we pay attention to safety, why should we pay attention to quality, and I say both because they are interrelated these days. Go look for, there's a good video that's out there that explains the whole sequence of how that rig managed to explode and what decisions were made along the way and what shortcuts were taken. So here we have our grid from September 2005, which was one of our early grids. A fair amount of yellows and reds on there, but there were some things going on. I won't explain what the acronyms all are, just to, the names have been changed to protect the innocent or the guilty, as the case may be. But it does give you a very quick overview. I mean, this is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 rows by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 columns. So this actually is taking 96 different charts, of which you would never get a manager to look at 96 charts in one sitting. And I'm very quickly portraying to them, here's what the 96 indicators are telling you, and probably what we ought to look at, like something at the organization called CS&I has an adverse trend going on in something called ORPS, Occurrence Reporting and Processing System, actually. I do show that we're able to use this to improve because if Joel does well, he'll flip to the next slide and hopefully you can kind of integrate from one slide to the next. And you see there's no reds, there's a bunch less yellows. So something's happened at waste storage and disposition to build up a bunch of yellows in their lagging indicators. Actually was able to take these. I've got a separate presentation I used at Hanford, which I took about a year's worth of these and made it an animation. So you could actually watch the colors flicker from one to the next. Rather cool and actually a story in itself. So I've multiplied 96 by 12 for a very quick read of what's going on in the third dimension, or the fourth dimension of time. All right. We're coming into the home stretch here. Slide 30, benefits. As hopefully I've demonstrated, and if you play around in Excel or any of your other favorite software, you'll see no special software need be purchased. There is dashboard software out there, and probably most of them could be reconfigured to use SPC. I don't know if you could automate the rules. I'll admit we've not automated the trend rules. A qualified person must still go in and say, is there a trend or is there not a trend? And I will say I trained up a secretary with a high school degree, high school education at Hanford. She made 300 charts a month, 300 control charts. She knew the rules. She could count to 7. Now, sometimes she would give me a holler and say, well, I got to 7. What do I do, Steve? Do I re-baseline or not? And I'd get involved. But certainly in Japan, high school educated folks are making control charts right and left. There's no reason workers in any shop in America can't make a control chart in a shop. So It can be done. Once you have this dashboard set up, and I would still have, as Deming talked about, having a company statistician, having somebody who's not a hack, who does know something, who's maybe a certified quality engineer or even a Six Sigma black belt, at least monitor these control charts and dashboards to keep them together. But once it's set up, it's easy to replicate and go. We kept the presentation very simple with the red, yellow, green, and intuitive, but I brought in the strength of statistical process control. Slide 31, again pushing the proactiveness of this. If you're at a good level, but you're heading the wrong direction, you're going to pick up a yellow or red now, not once the level crosses the threshold. In the Department of Energy world, we have a regulatory body called the Defense Nuclear Facility Safety Board, and the current head of it, a fine gentleman, Dr. Winokur, has quoted many times in his presentations that trends are more important than level. So I am in an environment where people understand. He didn't necessarily say make a control chart, but he did say trends are more important than level, where I want to react to, for the engineers out there, the first derivative, not the level. And the control chart allows me to do that, to know when the fire has actually gone off, when the smoke alarm has gone off. Slide 32. Again, this is published by American Society of Safety Engineers. If you have access, if you have a coworker that is an ASSE member, go see if you can get their May 2006 Professional Safety Magazine. Did get a lot of interest using that article. I'm always one that says it's worth publishing. I should put in the note that Quality Progress over the years, I've done about 4 or 5 articles with them in 10 years. I've always found the Quality Progress staff to be very, very professional, very helpful, very encouraging. So if your company is willing, which that's usually the big barrier, it is well worth putting some time into writing a story about what you've done. And finally, as we draw this to a conclusion, and I think, Joel, I met our management by objective criteria here, maybe short about 3 minutes. But what I've tried to do is bring together statistical trending, the color-coded executive summaries with the goal of eliminating management by objective, as I joke about that. We've also brought in the leading and lagging indicators, which leading indicators for many folks is a big ticket item, and merge these together in what as far as I can tell, is a fairly unique application of the combination. I know I keep an eye on the internet. I know a fine person in San Diego rewrote an article attributed to my magazine article about, hey, this looks like a good idea. So Joel thought this would be a good idea to get out to folks. I understand we've got a good attendance this month, so I'm very encouraged to have the opportunity to go through this. And Joel, have we got any questions?
Yes, thank you again, Steve. That was an excellent talk, and I know we've had huge attendance and have not been seeing anyone drop off the call or anything. So
nobody falls asleep on my statistics lectures.
Well, I was going to point out, if someone fell asleep but didn't log off first, they would still count as an attendee.
Oh, yes, operational definitions.
We do have a few questions that came up here. And
okay.
I'll just point out again to everyone before we go through the questions that we will be posting this as a recorded webinar, and we'll communicate out once that's posted. However, as Steve, you indicated in the beginning, there's a website on the bottom of the slide that's showing right now where you could actually download the slides of this presentation and other presentations that you've given. So,
yes, I should also put a pitch in for ASQ discussion boards. I am the moderator of the Ask a Quality Professional discussion board. So if in doubt, you can always go to ASQ discussion boards and submit a question to me there.
Yes, certainly a great resource to take advantage of. So I had one question that you had commented before about needing 12 points, or actually better to have more than 12 points when you're constructing a chart or anything. And
yes.
someone pointed out that Dr. Wheeler, who many of us are familiar with, says you don't really need 12 points and that as few as 4 may be enough, and whether or not that's something you would agree with.
Oh, I definitely agree, and I'm glad to whoever asked the question. That's a very profound question. I've made, and I'm on the side of Dr. Wheeler, I've made control charts with as few as 5 points. Big believer in using that instead of what they call short-run SPC. What I do find out, though, in organizations that are just awash with data, they'll have years and years and years worth of data, and the management says, I only want to see this year's data. So they're really cutting themselves short. So if you've got the data, if you have the data, I ask that you show at least 25 points. If you don't have the 25, go with what you got.
Excellent. And sort of as a follow-up to that, because it also concerns Wheeler, I don't know if you're familiar with his approach to charting rare events, but the question came up about what you felt about his method of charting rare events as an alternative to the low-rate special rules.
Definitely I agree with that. I should tell you the story. I went to the ASQ National Conference in 1996, and we were faced with that problem with the Department of Energy trending. We have something that happens only every 10 months or so. How do I tell what to do? And I went to Dr. Wheeler's booth, and I said, Dr. Wheeler, here's what I've got. He says, oh, yep, that's out there, very common. I said, so what do I do? He said, buy this book, which was Understanding Variation, the Key to Managing Chaos. And when I have a fairly sophisticated audience, I do definitely shift over to his low-rate trending. It's when I've got people I'm barely getting up on the ramp with control charting that I use the very simplified 7 rules. Now, the minute somebody says, I think this 7 rule is too simple, then I know we've proceeded on to being able to use that fine method that Dr. Wheeler came up with.
Excellent. And for this next question, I'm going to try to go back to the right portion of the presentation. You're talking about indicating whether or not a trend existed or not.
Yes.
Would you consider an out-of-control point to be a trend, or are you simply talking maybe about a linear trend or something along those lines?
Let's go back to slide 20. Can you pull that up?
Right here.
Now, there's my list, and I do consider any of those to be a trend. Now, granted, cycles or other non-random patterns in the data is very subjective, and I usually don't invoke that. But I do consider a single point outside the control limits is as much of a trend or an alarm. Maybe I should use the word alarm. I consider that to be an equally valid alarm, a point outside the control limits as 7 points in a row, the same side of the average, or for Dr. Wheeler, 8 points in the same side of the average. What's very profound about statistical process control, and I did not include this slide, but there's like a nonlinear relationship between the time required for an alarm value and the distance from the average. Like for 1 point, you need 3 standard deviations. For 2 or 3 points, you need 2. For 4 or 5, you need 1. And for just the same side of the average, you need 7 points. You can actually plot that out on a chart and say, this is the strength of SPC versus a moving average, is that I can detect both the short-term big shift and the long-term subtle shift. The moving average people have to, like do a 3-month moving average and a 12-month moving average, or the exponentially weighted moving average people have to do one with a low lambda and one with a high lambda. So here, with one chart, very graphic, which is what Dr. Deming liked, it's very pictorial, I can use one set of rules that detects multiple durations and extents. And again, those set of rules varies with author.
Excellent. And what about in the cases, this is also related sort of to the construction of the chart, how about situations where you have seasonality in your data? So it would be especially common in business, maybe sales cycle different times during the year, things like that. Right.
That's also a good question. I think we have a very good audience here today, by the way. I'll give you guys a lot of credit for good questions. Now, I admit I deal in the environment, safety, health, and quality world, though there's a lot of accusations of cycles in that world, and the only one I found in years of making 3,000 charts a month, the only seasonal cycle I've ever found is insect bites. Now, in the business world, yes, there can be, like in Christmas sales and stuff like that, that every Christmas I may have a peak. Now, if indeed you have that theory, then I would suggest plotting year by year the Christmas months, whatever you consider to be the Christmas season, and plot that as a control chart and say, what's the Christmas months doing? Maybe put November, December, January, November, December, January, November, December, January, sequentially on a control chart. and then do a separate control chart that's the rest of the year, you know, February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October. Where did I start? February, March, April, May, June, July. Yeah, you get the idea there. Now, you can also do an analysis of means and actually plot all the Januaries and their standard deviations and their average and all the Februaries and say, do I really have a cycle? I'm afraid our human mind is so great. I hope some folks out there have read Fooled by Randomness. Now, this is by Nassim Taleb, and he's one of the favorite authors of Tom Peters. But if you've never read it, go find Fooled by Randomness, because our minds see patterns that don't exist. So often somebody will look at 3 years worth of data and say, aha, there's a seasonal cycle. And I would just state that I don't think you can prove there's a cycle in 3 years. So yes, seasonal cycles can exist, and if they do exist, I'd suggest, you know, breaking apart the cycle into multiple control charts, but they are much rarer, in my opinion, than people think.
Excellent. Let me click ahead to the correct slide for this question. When we got to your overall dashboard here.
Yes, one of like slide 28.
28 or 29 will work for
yes,
this.
Either are. They're both the same thing.
Sure. What would you think about changing the look of this so that maybe you sorted these by those that had red or yellow or green to maybe highlight better those that had different colors on them? Maybe the red at the top.
That's a good idea. That could be considered. And I will admit I kept the same things in the same spot so that when managers went, okay, I'm used to that upper right-hand corner looking like this, you know, 6 of one, half dozen the other. I certainly would not argue with somebody who would want to sort by, like, maybe on slide 28 showing ORPs and safety-related employee concerns first because they've got reds. Now, of course, interestingly enough, near misses have an overall yellow because they're fairly inconsistent across the company. Now, one thing I should say on the overall column left of the blue line, those were actual charts at the company level. They were not an average of the colors. There was actually a company level chart that was executed as a control chart. But I certainly see no reason that you could not, you know, if it made it more hard-hitting for management, if it works in your context, do it.
All right. So this next question, there are actually 2 questions in one, but I'm going to kind of paraphrase the first one because it's something I'd be curious about as well. The gist of the idea here is why limit yourself to 3 colors here and sort of categorize things that really have a continuous backing behind them? So why not maybe do different shades of green depending on how good it is and fading to yellow or red, or why not have a more continuous measure? The person asking the question points out that you may have 2 different actions for green here, so green alone isn't enough to indicate what should be done.
Well, I will say this, if you're concerned about this question, don't do the color coding, show the original chart. I mean, realize we are losing information. Dr. Wheeler talks about this. As I simplify this down to any set of colors, I'm losing connection with reality. So if your management is willing to sort through 96 control charts in the continuum, more power to them and let them. Now, this is more meant for somebody who's going, look, I got 10 seconds to look at your 96 charts. What hits me? And if I'm giving them, you know, mauves and all that, I would just suggest that the more complex I make it, the tougher. Now, we did go to 4 colors in this system. Again, 3 colors, red, yellow, green, wasn't sufficient. I brought in white. Strangely enough, I came to Savannah River, and they used red, yellow, green, and blue as kind of a super green. And then for some reason, they decided that wasn't enough. We're actually using red, yellow, green, purple, and blue. And I think the more shades of colors you bring in, you're eliminating the simplicity. Remember, we're trading off simplicity and quick read for details. So obviously, like the red in ORPS under CS&I, I just can't say it's red, oh my God. I need to pull that chart. So my suggestion would be don't get too fancy with shades of colors, because if you're really that concerned, just go with the original chart.
And what would you do about outliers in the case of using this for a dashboard or using SPC for a dashboard? Would you remove them from the chart or still display them but maybe annotate them?
Well, it depends. Now, if we're talking, I've just decided to start making a dashboard. We're talking initial charting?
I think we're talking about things we've assigned a cause to.
Right.
That's out of the ordinary.
Right. Well, let's talk through this. Okay, let's say we've been stable and we blow the upper control limit. Now, if we assume it's something like more, I'm going to pick a fairly fuzzy thing like corrective action management. We've suddenly got more corrective actions are in the system for maintenance procedures. That's a real situation here right now. Our corrective action management, we have a big increase in maintenance in corrective action management, and I colored it red to start with and say, we've got to look at it. Now, come to find out, at one of our facilities, they're doing something called Human Performance Initiative, and they've encouraged the maintenance people to document errors, minor errors, so we can learn from them. That's of course, the contradiction to corrective action management is I want to document more corrective action management because I really want to capture these things. So, oh my word, Steve, you made me red and I'm doing the right thing. Well, I would still say, yeah, it's red to say it went up, but what it caused you to do was go find out why, and you've said it went up because of a good thing. Now, in some cases, you could change that red to whatever you want and say, hey, we investigated it. It was due to a good thing. We're going to call it green. Nothing wrong with that. This is mostly initial triage. We've got an alarm on the control chart, just like the fire alarm in your building. You don't sit around going, oh, I bet it's a drill, or it was a drill yesterday, and this thing always false alarms at noon, but you evacuate the building. So this is, again, follow your indication. Now research it, and yes, you could disposition it off of red if come to find out it was a good thing. Now recognize, too, a decrease in reporting could be a bad thing if the next person who reports a corrective action management item is fired, and of course they go down. You should also investigate when they look like they're getting better, but they're really not. How's that?
Excellent. Excellent. And another one would be, is there a situation where you would use a median instead of a mean for the center line and control limits?
Yes, David. He must have taken Davis Balistracci's class. I know Davis is big into medians. If you use medians, use medians.
Excellent. Excellent. Sorry, we have a number of questions that come in here, and I'm sure we won't be able to get to all of them. We have a couple more minutes. So one question that's come up has been around still around this idea of maybe limiting ourselves to colors instead of charts, and whether or not the people who own these processes are looking at charts or should be looking at the original charts rather than rolling this up into a simplified version for executives. Maybe you could speak to why this is provided to executives instead of simply having people act on their own process.
Yes, good old bureaucracies and that. Well, again, even when I deal with my own direct manager, he'll say, Steve, give me the 10-second elevator speech. So again, this is meant to be the 30-second elevator speech. Certainly, if anybody watched the video of the CEO of Ford, I'm drawing a blank of his name, but he was trying to manage a global corporation, and give me the bottom line. So there's, again, a balance between the loss of information from going to the colors and the quick hit of reading the colors. So definitely I would expect, like, for example, on my dashboard, the PFP plutonium finishing plant is familiar with what their charts look like. But certainly when that manager went to his weekly meeting with the CEO and the other vice presidents, he would have to say about, well, what's going on with safety-related employee concerns, so just so they could get the warm fuzzy that he's doing the right thing. So again, we're talking a compromise here between, hey, I've got a 100-page report and here's a one-page quick overview. Neither, there are situations where there are downsides to each. So we try to use both of them. At least with the dashboard, you can say, well, let's manage by exception.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, we're almost out of time. I'm going to add this one last little question and then
okay.
Go ahead and forward things to the last slide. There were other questions that are unanswered that, as I indicated, I'll be able to share with you at the end. And, of course, people can contact you, or we can utilize the Ask a QA Professional discussion board or our own LinkedIn account if we'd like to address other questions or issues with this. So
Yeah, speaking of LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn also. You will find me there.
Excellent. The last one, just on the same thing here, which is, of course, your final dashboard, is did you or would you consider it beneficial if each of these linked up to the control chart that created it, so someone could drill down and get further information if they were interested?
Oh, yes. In the presentation we had on the file server, and that's what some of that other Excel information I glossed over to, if you clicked on one of those panes, it would open up the slide that has the control charts.
Okay, excellent. We're glad to hear. Well, sounds like we have quite a few more questions, so hopefully those can be addressed later. Again, we have your email address up here, and this is recorded, so we'll have this shared with the group in the future. And I'd like to thank not only our attendees for taking an hour out of your day to hear this. We've had great feedback already. But I'd also like to thank you, Steve, for your time presenting this, and we hope to have you back in the future for another webinar.
Well, I'd certainly be very appreciative of another invitation to come on back, and please, I'd love to hear your comments, and I think you got my email out there, and as I say, I'm also on LinkedIn and the ASQ, so.
Excellent. Appreciate it, and we'll be posting very shortly for next month's webinar, which will also have an SPC flavor to it. It'll be presented by Wayne Fisher, and that's going to be a two-part webinar, so hopefully we can continue this really strong series with that one, and return to another great webinar by you here in the next few months.
Well, very good, and thanks to everyone for listening in.
All right, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.